This is my dream machine, is what I hope to say by the end of this video. Now, for those of you who don't know, back in May 2023, I was lucky enough to get my hands on one of the few early prototypes of this machine, and it was so compelling that by the end of that review, we ended up backing it on Kickstarter. Fast forward to today, and I have with me the production unit of the Meticulous Espresso machine, so it's safe to say that I'm a little excited. Now, before we get started, there is a little bit of housekeeping. First up, this is the production unit from a hardware standpoint. The software, I would say, is still a work in progress. It's almost there, but there are daily updates and there are things that they're tweaking constantly. One of them is pretty significant, so we'll cover all of that in this video, but it's just something to keep in mind before we jump into this. The other thing, which is a bigger deal, is a disclaimer. Now, in 23, when I reviewed the prototype, I had no association with the company, but I have since worked with them for a period of 6 months on a project. Luckily, I didn't work on the espresso machine, so I think that helps a little bit, but I still really like the company. I consider the founder, Carlos, a friend, and I'm human. So for that reason, I will not be calling this a review. That being said, we did spend our own money on this and waited patiently, so I would very much like to share my thoughts on it, if that's okay with you. Let's get into it. We have a lot of ground to cover. Okay, I'm going to kick things off with a quick overview for those of you who aren't familiar with this machine. It is essentially a manual lever machine like the Flare 58, but instead of you controlling the lever, you have a little computer in here that actually runs a full version of Linux that's doing the work for you. And that opens up a world of possibilities. You have a bunch of temperature sensors in here, you have a pressure sensor, it calculates input flow on the fly, and you even have scales that are built by Akaya that allow you to monitor the output weight of the brew, and also have cool features like brew by weight. It is absolutely packed with features, but before I get ahead of myself, let's talk about aesthetics. This machine is ultra minimal. It's constructed with basic forms like cubes, cuboids, cylinders, and is super understated, so much so that I didn't even realize it had branding here until today. I know that this aesthetic isn't for everyone, but I absolutely love it. It's also a skinny machine with a pretty tiny footprint, but it is tall. So if you have limited clearance on your countertop, then definitely keep that in mind. Now, if I had to nitpick, there are a couple of things that I would maybe change. The paint job is very nice, but fingerprints are really visible, and even coffee splatter really stands out. I wonder if a slightly more textured finish would fix that, but again, like I said, nitpicky. The other thing that I don't love is the taper of the handle. I also think the handle is a tad too long. I just wish it was a straight cylinder. I think it would make it look a little chunkier and nicer and go with the rest of the aesthetic. But other than that, I think it's a beautiful machine, and even the screen is bright and colorful and high resolution. But now, let's look at the build quality. This thing is built like a tank. It is deceptively heavy, coming in at 15.5 kilograms. Even though it has a pretty thin base plate, there is absolutely no flex if I try to rock this holding the top of the machine. It is pretty much all metal other than the inside of the drip tray, which is actually very high quality plastic. All of the bodywork is thick metal panels. The buttons all feel really nice and clicky. The rotary knob, which is the main control, has really nice tactile feedback, and even this click sounds very satisfying, unlike some other rotary knobs that we've seen recently. Aiden. Pretty much everything feels very premium, and if they've taken so much care and time with the exterior, then I'm fairly confident they would have done the same on the inside. Also, while there is a computer in here and you can pull super complicated shots, the machine as such is quite simple, and we'll look at that more in detail when we talk about service and repairability. So we fired up the machine. I'm going to quickly show you the UI before we pull some shots. Before you go trashing me in the comments about how filthy my machine is, I cleaned it right before the shoot. So it either drives home the point that this is a fingerprint magnet, or I just have greasy hands. Anyway, it boots up to the last recipe that you pulled, and like you can see, it has this cool album art style thing going on, and you just rotate the dial and it zooms out and shows you like this catalog view with all of the album art. I really like this. I just wish there was a little bit of organization. I already have a bunch of recipes in here and I'm having to scroll quite a bit. So maybe a compact view of folders would be great. You scroll through, you pick a recipe, and then if you click, it kind of has a nice zoom in effect. And if I want to start a brew, I have to press and hold. If I just click, it won't start. And this is the case for all critical functions on this machine. If I want to abort a brew, if I want to skip a step, I absolutely love this because it ensures that you don't accidentally trigger something that you didn't intend to. Something I'm prone to doing very often. Once you're on a recipe, you can click the side button to get into the settings. And here, the top 3 settings are to do with that recipe. If you go further below, these are more general settings, like you can put the machine to sleep, you can raise the piston, purge it, and you also have brew settings. There's an interesting one in there, which we'll talk about a little later on. And then you have your Wi-Fi configuration and then exit. Let's go back and look at the recipe related settings. You have edit profile, which we're going to do in a second. Then you have last shot. I really like this. This shows you a very cool graph of the last shot that was pulled using this recipe. You can even scrub through, stop at any point in time, and look at the values of flow, pressure, and weight at that given moment. I love it. Of course, you can delete a profile. Again, as you can see, you can't just click and poof, profile gone. I've done that so many times on other machines. Here, you have to hold it down. You have to want to delete it. Okay, let's go back to editing a profile. If I click on this, you can change the name, temperature, output. These 2 are key ones that you'll see on every recipe. Then you can select an image, which I really like because it adds an additional layer of customization and it also flaunts this nice color screen. And then here's another feature that's awesome. You're going to hear me say this a lot. If you have a recipe that you use a lot, but you just want to fiddle with some settings and do a test brew, you can actually change anything that you want in a recipe and just brew without saving, and it'll use those settings just at one time. So you're not messing with the original recipe at all. Very cool. Then we have save, which of course, if you make changes that you want to save, you hit that. And lastly, we have discard, which is what I'm going to click because I don't want to mess this recipe up. So with that, you basically had the ability to change temperature and output weight. Now, some recipes, you'll have a little more. If you come down to say, this one, if you click on this button and then go to edit profile, you'll see that we have temperature, output, the standard ones, then you can select the image, but then we have pressure, flow limit, and then we have brew without saving. So these 2 are variables which I added on the app for this recipe. And this is by far one of the coolest features on this machine, and we're going to dive into it when we look at the app. But basically, I can create custom variables within the app that will then show up on the machine, and I can change it very quickly. So you can build out a very complex recipe and very simply manipulate it on this. Amazing. That's how you edit a recipe. But if you scroll all the way to the end, you can add new ones. If you click here, the first few are created by Meticulous. And if you go further down, you start to see community profile recipes. These are created by beta testers and people who've got their machines and they've created these cool recipes and shared it to the community. A lot of these are amazing. I use a couple of them all the time. So you scroll down, you see which recipe you want, and then you just click, boom, it gets added to your machine. And just like with the other recipes, you can click, go in, and edit it. But of course, if you want to build something from scratch, then you got to hop onto the app. And if you start a shot by holding this button down, this is what the UI looks like. You have this cool animation that goes from purple all the way to orange as it gets hot. Looks very cool. If your recipe is for say 92 and you're at 90 and you're like, it's fine, I just want to brew, you can just go down and it gives you this countdown. So again, you're not doing something critical by mistake. Small details that I really appreciate. You also have the estimated time for the water to get up to temperature. So you can already see that the color is changing. I really like this animation. You have 2 options. Right now it's on push to brew, which basically means that once it's up to temperature, you will have the option to press this button to start a brew. If you switch to auto brew, then you better be sure that you're going to finish all your puck prep and have the portafilter locked in, because in that mode, once it's up to temperature, it'll automatically raise the piston and start the shot. That's about it in terms of the interface when you're actually pulling a shot. Now, before we start pulling shots, there's one last thing that I wanted to show you that I mentioned earlier. If you jump back into the menu and go to brew settings, there's a setting called shot volume here. Now, lowering this value hasn't been implemented yet, but in my review of the prototype, I said that it would be cool to fill just enough water to finish your shot so that you're not wasting any water. And this is especially useful for people like me who make custom water. If you're spending money on sachets like Third Wave and stuff, You don't really want to just be purging it away. So that would be a useful setting. Kind of niche, but useful. The other thing you can do is increase this. So when the piston is in this position at the bottom, this cylindrical stem and stuff are taking up space in the brew chamber. So if I now fill water in here, it would hold around 100 mils, which is what this default setting is at. And so it's then programmed so the piston rises just enough to be able to push down that 100 mils of water. Now, if the piston moved all the way up with just 100 mils of water, then you'd have an air gap on top, and you don't really want that. It'll be spongy. You won't get accurate back pressure readings, so it causes a bunch of issues. But the thing is, that extra space is available on the inside. So if you did want to use it, here's how you can. It's a bit of a faff. So basically, you increase this to whatever value you want. You heat water in a kettle, and then you hit go. And as the piston is retracting, fill the chamber so that you're actively filling the chamber as it's moving above that 100 mil mark. Hopefully that makes sense. So it is a bit clunky, but if you really did want to brew those longer shots, you can do it. Well, that's it for the UI. Let's pull some shots, drink some coffee, and then we can look at the app. All right, let's make some coffee. So for the first shot, I have some POV footage because I thought it would be nice to walk you through my workflow. I think it'll be helpful. Basically, with this machine, there's just one thing that you need to remember to have excellent workflow. Just make sure you fill up the chamber and start the profile before doing anything else. And then you can go ahead and pick your coffee. Today we're brewing ARAMSE Balanced Edition 1. You can weigh out the beans. You can even use the built-in scales. It's actually very convenient. Go ahead and grind your beans. Do whatever fancy puck prep that you do, shake, WDT, dance. And once you've tamped and you lock the portafilter in, the machine will be ready to go. There is a caveat, but I'll get to that later. Then just click this knob and the machine will go ahead and do its magic. It'll raise the piston, go through all of the stages. This is a fairly complex recipe, which I'll break down when we look at the app. But once that's done, you can remove the cup, purge the excess water. And while it's purging, it shows you that neat graph of the shot that you just pulled. Very cool stuff. So yeah, just fill the tank and start the shot first. That way, when you lock the portafilter in, the machine is waiting for you and not the other way around. Okay, now let's make some soup. Again, we're going to be using our coffee. This is Vibrant Edition 1. It's a lovely red honey from Salawara Estate. And we're going to be using a recipe called Like and Subscribe. This is actually Bailey's soup recipe, which I've modified. And by modified, I mean changed the name. So it's basically my recipe. But it's an interesting one because it uses just 2 stages and both just use power. Fill the tank up. I'm not going to bore you again with puck prep and waiting for this thing to heat up. And so, by the power of editing, okay, we're ready to brew. I just need to hit this. That's it, we're done. Now, soup pulls always look like what happens after you drink coffee, but man, do they taste good. Let's give this a try. Cheers. Just straight up fruit juice, lots of crisp apple, mixed berries, honey. This is delightful. Okay, one last shot, just a regular 1:2 with this medium roast for some gooey crema pon, and then we can move on. And while that heats up, let me go prep the puck. Let's do this. Hopefully it's dialed in. That looks good. All right. All right, a tad quick, but should taste great anyway. I've had way too much coffee, so I'm gonna go ahead, give this Namisha a clean up, and then we can move on. Yeah, it's pretty nuts what this thing can do. I've been using it every day for about 2 months now, and I'm still fascinated every time I pull a shot. Now, I hate to be a buzzkill, but there's some bad news. Now, I've been testing the Odyssey Argos and the Meticulous pretty much side by side. Very excited for that review. I think it's coming out next. So early on, I was pulling very similar profiles on both machines with the same coffee, but I was getting very different tasting shots. Especially with the 1:2 shots, I always preferred the Argos. That was very confusing to me. Clearly something was off. And it didn't take a lot of digging to figure out what that was. It was the temperature. Let me show you. So I stuck a probe at the top of the water tank and another one at the bottom, set up a profile to hit a particular temperature. In this case, it's 92 degrees Celsius. And then I just let the water sit. Even when the machine told me that it's ready to brew, I just let it go to see what happens. Here's the graph. Yep, it's a disaster. Basically, if you look at the red line, which is the top of the chamber, it gets up to temperature pretty quickly. But the bottom is chilling. At the 3-minute mark, when the machine says it's ready to go, it's 30 degrees cooler than the target temperature. So if you open up the valve and let it mix at the bottom, you get a brew temperature that's 10 degrees cooler than what you want. That's not okay. The other issue, as you can see here, is that it took a whopping 15 minutes for the water at the bottom to get up to temperature. It might as well be an ARAMSE product. Okay, so why is this happening? Well, I was a little confused initially, but then I went back to 8th grade physics. Convection currents. If you have a kettle that's heated from below, the liquid at the bottom is denser, it gets heated, it becomes less dense, it wants to rise to the top, so on and so forth. You have excellent vertical mixing, all of the temperature equalizes and everything comes up to temperature very quickly and efficiently. Here, on the other hand, you have a cylinder, but the heating element is as tall as the cylinder and goes all the way around. So you have the fluid that's closest to the walls that's being heated and that rises to the top and it almost forms like a ceiling. So then you have cooler and cooler water as you go down. You get this stratification. There isn't really an opportunity for efficient convection. So even if you apply the same amount of power, it takes a lot longer for all of the liquid in the chamber to come up to temperature. At least that's the only reason I can think of. But I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments below if I'm way off. And then we have probably the biggest issue. Say you're pulling a shot today and you start it right away the moment the machine says it's ready. And then the following day, you get distracted, the doorbell rings, and you start the shot, say 5-6 minutes later. Those two shots, even though you're pulling the exact same recipe, are not going to taste the same. Because like we just saw, this thing continues heating the water until all of it is at the same temperature. That's a pretty big issue, right? Because this thing is telling me it's doing one thing, but it's doing another thing. You know what they say about relationships? It's all about the trust. Now, I continued testing, and this extreme of a problem is only for the first shot because everything is cold and at room temperature. If you look at the graph of the shot that I pulled right after this, especially with the top lid on, you can see that things are a lot quicker, which makes sense because this brew chamber is now toasty and preheated from the previous shot. So the workaround for the first shot would be to just boil a kettle and use that water, or start the shot, go do something else, come back 10-12 minutes later, and you should be good. But I still think it's really important for the machine to display the correct temperature and not say that it's ready in 3 minutes. That is super misleading. But I'm very curious, how many of you are okay with this workflow? Let me know in the comments below. I was still a little bummed. You're paying for this robot lever machine and the marketing clearly says no kettle, no problem. So I reached out to Carlos and asked him if there was an issue with my unit or whether other people had complained about this. And within 5 minutes of that conversation, I was at ease. My biggest concern was that this was a hardware limitation. Even if it was an issue with my unit, it's fine, that can be fixed. But if it's a hardware limitation, you're stuck with this. So basically, the heating element in here isn't even breaking a sweat. What that means is that it's not really being pushed. So here's what Carlos said. If you crank the heat on this thing, it will melt the steel in 45 seconds. When I heard this, I was grinning like an idiot because with 6 temperature sensors in here and the additional heating power, I was fairly confident this could be sorted out with just software. The other piece of good news is that they're already working on a fix. The new algorithm is going to creatively use this additional power that's available without melting the steel to be able to get the water up to temperature. I think with the current algorithm, they wanted to make absolutely sure that they never overshot the target temperature. I think they did too good of a job with that. But with the new one, it's going to try and get as close to the target temperature as possible, even if that means it overshoots by a degree or two. And I think that's a much better way to approach it. I think small changes in temperature aren't even really noticeable, so it's not something that we need to obsess about so much. I am eagerly waiting to get my hands on this firmware update, but until then, I will begrudgingly boil my kettle before pulling the first shot. Okay, let's look at the app. Little warning, things are about to get very nerdy, so buckle up. So if your machine is on and you fire it up, it connects pretty easily. You have an image of the machine. I wish this was animated to show that the chamber is heating or the scales are being used or something. Right now, it's just a static image that's taking up a bunch of space. While the app is fully functional, there are some basic features that are missing, which is why it feels a little unfinished, but I'll get to those a little later on. First, let me run you through the layout. You have all of your key information here, like the weight, temperature, pressure, and flow rate. And then below that, you have tare, purge, raise, and preheat. Again, these are self-explanatory. You have really good scales built by Akaya that are built in here, so you can use them to weigh your beans or for baking. Everyone's a baker these days. And then purge basically pushes the piston down, raise lifts it up. And the preheat function, you can add some water to the tank and have it preheat before you start a shot. Below that, you have this album style display of all of your recipes. And if you scroll through, you can see that it updates real time on the machine because they are directly connected at this point. You can then tap on any recipe and start the recipe or edit it. Below that, you can create a new profile. You can import profiles that are created by the community, or if Meticulous puts out some new profiles, you can import those. The mirror mode is interesting. It's just a neat little feature that allows you to post a video of your shot pulling along with the data overlaid on top of it. Real time, of course, will show you your graphs when a shot is pulling. Now, if you hit create new profile, you can either choose an existing profile and edit it, or you can choose a blank one and it opens up this screen. You can change the album art and add any photo you want. You can set temperature, final weight, then you have the variables. And below that, where you see the small plus is where you add the stages or steps of the recipe. And these can be driven by one of three things, either flow, power, or pressure. Now, flow and pressure we're familiar with, but power is basically direct control of the power delivered to the motor. And that is very useful in certain scenarios. I'll show you in a second. But basically, flow and pressure indirectly control power. Say you set the flow to 4 mils per second, then the machine is manipulating power in order to move the piston in a way to achieve that as closely as possible. For pressure, of course, it's reading the back pressure from the transducer in here and then delivering power accordingly. With power, that's direct. Now, instead of creating a recipe from scratch, dissecting one that I've already put together, I think is a better way to explain how all of this works. So let's go back and go to a recipe called hybrid medium. And then we can edit this. So if you open this up, you can see the usual temperature and final weight, but below that is where things get very interesting. Here we have the custom variables: pressure limit, flow max, weight. These are three variables that I built. You can rename them by tapping this little cogwheel. You can even delete them. You can change the value and they show up on the machine, and you can control them with this knob, which is insanely powerful. Let me show you why. If I scroll further, this segment is where you have the stages or steps of the recipe: fill, ramp up, hold, and ramp down. These are names that I've given to the steps. Okay, let's go into step one. We have a graph up top. The x-axis is always time here, but the y-axis changes depending on what the driver is for the step. And here it goes from -100 to +100. Positive values will push the piston down, negative will retract. So here, I just want the motor to have 100% power, which means it pushes the piston down as fast as possible to saturate the puck. I don't want it to be dependent on pressure or flow, and that's what makes this very, very useful. Below that is the limiter. Now, when you have power here, the limiter is pressure. If you have pressure, it's flow. And for flow, again, it's pressure. So basically what this means is it's currently set to infinity, but I could lower this to any value. This will be better explained in the next step. So I'll set it back to infinity. And the last segment of a stage is the exit criteria. basically the condition that needs to be met for it to move to the next stage. You can have just one or multiple conditions. This here says if the pressure exceeds 3 bars, then move to the next stage. So basically I want to saturate the puck, and the moment the pressure starts going up, I want it to move to the next stage. So let's go back here. The next stage is the ramp up. If I click in here, again, we have a graph, but the driver here is pressure. So while the x-axis remains as time, the y-axis is now pressure. As you can see here, you have the point on the left starting at 4 bars, and then it ends at 8 bars. You can move points around to set them wherever you want. I'm going to leave this at 4 bars. If you hold, you can add points, move those around, and then you can have a curved line like this to ease in and out of the points, or you can switch to linear, and that will give you abrupt changes. You can do some crazy stuff here. I'm going to go ahead, hold this, and drag it down to delete that point. Now, another thing you would have noticed here is on the left-hand side, we have a circle. On the right-hand side, we have a square, and there's some text above it. What that means is that point is locked to a variable, and the variable is pressure, like we saw here. This top one is called pressure limit, and that is what this is locked to. The way we can check this is if you tap on it, it'll turn white, and then you hit the cogwheel. Here you can see that it's linked to pressure limit 8, and that's a variable that I created. If you switch this back to none and hit save, that'll become a circle, or you can hit it again, and then you can add a new variable. You can say pressure new, and then add that and save. And now that is locked to pressure new. And if we come back here, you can see that that new variable has been created here. Okay, let me explain the step. Over 3 seconds, we're ramping up from 4 bars to 8 bars of pressure. And below that, you can see the limiter here is flow, and we have it set to 2.5 mils per second. So basically what it's telling the machine is try and go from 4 bars to 8 bars of pressure in 3 seconds, but if there isn't enough puck resistance, don't let the flow go above 2.5 mils per second. That's the ceiling. Extremely powerful feature. But another thing you'll notice is this little V next to it. Again, if you hit this cogwheel, you'll see that this is mapped to flow max, which is a variable that I've set up in the previous page, which you saw again under the custom variable list. And then the exit criteria for this card is just time. In 3 seconds, ramp up to 8 bars and then switch to the next stage. Let's look at the next stage. Then we have the hold. So as the name suggests, we have it holding a flat 8 bars of pressure over a period of 5 seconds. Again, here you can see both these points are squares, so I'm making use of that pressure limit variable, and you can start to see how it's making my life a whole lot easier. I need to use this value of 8 bars multiple times in various stages, so having this variable makes it very, very easy to set those values. It's much easier than having to create a dot, move it around, have it set to the right value. Instead of that, I just tap on it, click on the cogwheel, set it to the pressure limit, and hit save. It snaps into place. So freaking cool. Now let's look at the limiter. Again, here we have a flow limiter, and again, it's locked to that variable. I don't need to sit and manually fiddle with the slider and try to get it exact. I just hit the cogwheel, set it, and I'm done. So if you know that you're going to be using a value again and again and again, it's a great use case for a variable. And then for the first time, we see that there are 2 conditions below. If either one are met, it will move to the next step. One is if it takes longer than 5 seconds, and the other is if the output beverage weight hits 25 grams. Here again, you see a little V next to weight. If I click in here, you can see that it is tied to the weight variable. Now this value of 25 grams, I'm using only once, but I still decided to make it a variable because I wanted to show up on the machine and be able to control it there without having to jump back into the app. So that's the second reason to use a variable. And for the last step, we have ramp down. Here, there's no exit criteria because we're finishing out the shot with this. Here we start at 8 bars, gradually ramp down to 6 bars, and wait until we hit the target weight. And again, we're restricting this to 2.5 mils per second. So as you can see, we've used the pressure limit and flow max variable in multiple stages. Sometimes we've even used it twice in the same stage. So being able to change all of those values across stages with the turn of a single knob is why I'm so freaking excited every time I talk about this feature. So yeah, that's the recipe, and at any given point, you can edit any of these one variables either here or on the machine, and it will change it across stages. Let me show you. So if I want to change the pressure from 8 to 9 bars, I can just change that here. And then if I go into this, you can see that it's moved up to 9 bars. If I click here and then tap, you can see that the pressure limit value has now changed to 9 bars. Absolutely crazy stuff. The possibilities are wild. So the only thing you can't do on this machine that you can on something like a Decent is temperature profiling. So overall, I think the app is great, but here are some improvements I'd like to see. Firstly, haptics or a keyboard input to enter values. Moving these sliders around or the points around, trying to get to the exact value is a bit of a faff. So haptics would make that a lot easier to get precise values. And if you really want it to be a lot quicker, you should be able to just tap, a keyboard should open up and you can enter the value. So that's one thing that I think would really improve the UX. The next one is warning messages. This has none, which is why it actually feels like it's in beta. Let me show you. If I make a bunch of changes like this, change the pressure, change the max, and I'm like, okay, cool, I'm happy with this, and I hit back by mistake, goes to the previous screen, you've lost all of your changes. It needs a pop-up to say, are you sure you want to go back without saving, or something like that. The next one is how easy it is to accidentally change the value of a variable. I think one should only be able to change the variables over here. But right now, if I go into a stage and I'm trying to do something like add another point and I just tap this and move it, now that variable has been changed on every stage. If I go back here, as you can see, it's no longer 9 bars, it's 10.9 bars. And if I come here, it's now holding at 10.9 bars. So I really think that if it's a square in the graph, then it should be locked. You shouldn't be able to edit it. Or if you really wanted to have editability over here, you should have to tap it, go to the cogwheel, and have a slider here that edits it. Right now, it's just way too easy to accidentally change the value of a variable. Even here, you now have this locked to the variable, but if I just move this slider, flow max is now 3.9 mils per second by accident. You can see that that value is reflected here. And if I come to any other stage that uses that variable, it's now 3.9 mils per second. So I just think it's way too easy to mess up a recipe right now. Another one is organization. I already have a bunch of recipes here. I would love to tag some as favorites so they show up at the top of the list. Some sort of folder structure would be great. So just general organization of recipes would be amazing. Now, speaking of organization, I would love to be able to jump into a recipe and reorder these stages. It's more complicated than it seems to implement from a coding standpoint, but I would love to have this feature and also be able to duplicate a stage. And lastly, I think it would be super useful if we could have author notes. As you can see, recipes can get pretty complex, and even for someone technical or nerdy about coffee like me, it can take a while to figure out what a recipe is doing. A description of what the recipe does, what coffee it works well with, what kind of brew times you should be aiming for, what dose to use. Basic information like this would help someone both pick a recipe and get dialed in quicker. Okay, maintenance and repair. Let's start with maintenance. This is practically a zero maintenance machine. I would just wipe the shower screen after every shot. I like to give this top section a bit of a wipe down after pulling a shot, especially if there's water there. If you do see a little bit of scale buildup or anything, then you can just chuck some descaler in there, let the tank heat up, let it sit for about 10-15 minutes, drain it, and then wipe it down. You can do that probably once every 6 months. And then every month or so, you can pop off the shower screen and give that a clean. Other than that, there's really nothing that you need to do with this machine. So super, super low maintenance when you compare to something like a boiler machine. And then we have repairs. So I asked Meticulous about this, and here's what they had to say. They said that this machine is built to be really, really easy to self-repair. And that's great news because usually machines like that have a lot of off-the-shelf parts and have parts that are really easy to remove and put back in. So they said the skill level required is as basic as putting a PC together, like aligning the motherboard, screwing that in, slotting in your RAM, things like that. And even if you found that challenging, I'm pretty sure there's an electronic repair store around the corner that can help you through it with maybe a guide video from Meticulous. If there is a part that fails that isn't readily available where you are, then Meticulous will ship that out to you along with the tools that you need. Most repairs can be done with a Phillips head and a hex key. That is the short-term solution. And the more medium-term solution is to actually have distributed knowledge. So they'll have people around the world that can actually come and help you with slightly more complicated repairs. So yeah, it's definitely a much more modern approach to service and repairability. It sounds very promising in theory. They say they've already trialed this with some beta testers with great success. So we'll just have to wait and see how the whole thing rolls out. Here's a quick reminder of how I started this video. This is my dream machine. is what I hope to say by the end of this video. So, is this my dream machine? Well, at just under $2,000, excluding shipping and customs depending on where you live, you get a machine that looks amazing, is built really well, has excellent UI and UX both on device and in the app, is silent, requires next to no maintenance, and you can pull pretty much any kind of shot your heart desires. And in spite of the temperature issues, which means you have to wait 10 minutes instead of 3 to pull your first shot, I still think this is an absolute banger of a machine. And I got it at the early bird price of $1,300, excluding shipping and customs. So I think I can safely say that my dream espresso machine has indeed arrived, and this will not be leaving the ARAMSE coffee bar anytime soon. But it's not for everyone. I don't know if you noticed, there isn't any steam wand here. So if you're someone who regularly brews milk-based drinks, then this is not really going to work for you. You'll have to invest in something like the Meticulous Milk, which isn't out yet, or something like the Flare Wizard. Shout out to Flare, that thing is very cool, but you do need an additional heat source. So yeah, that's definitely something to think about if you really enjoy milk-based drinks. I would also say if you're not particularly nerdy about espresso and like tinkering with profiles, then maybe this machine is a bit overkill for you. I mean, you can totally get it, set one profile and just get excellent shots every day. It'll look great doing it on the countertop, but it's kind of like using a Ferrari to just get groceries. You'll barely be scratching the surface, but at least you'll be doing it in style. And on that note, I think it's time we wrap this one up. I do apologize for how long it's been since we posted our last video, but December was absolutely wild. We launched our own coffee, our subscription service went viral, and a whole bunch of other stuff happened on the personal front. So it was very, very hard to sit and put a video together. Hopefully the Argos will be a little quicker because we've already almost completed testing that machine and I'm very excited for that one. Now I would love to hear from all of you, especially the ones who've already got your machines. Has your experience been similar to mine? I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And for those of you who have backed it or are considering buying it, is there anything that I missed? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and brew meticulously, but ARAMSE.